Today we will be discussing the sociology of conspiracy theories. As you could see here, I've included a strange image, not for the sake of it, but in an attempt to disorient you. As we will discuss today, conspiratorial ideation is closely linked to feelings of being disoriented, particularly in the modern world. So, turning to the first reading, Understanding Conspiracy Theories by Karen Douglas and some colleagues. They are seeking here to demonstrate 1. What factors are associated with conspiracy theories? 2. How are conspiracies communicated? And 3. What are the societal risks and rewards of conspiracies? This is a literature review, not research. They tell us that across history, conspiracies have been closely linked to prejudice, witch hunts, revolutions, terrorism, and genocide. When we talk about conspiracy theories, we are talking about sort of, the more trivial ones that you might find amusing online or whatever. But we're also talking about very serious moments in history, and conspiracy theories pop up many times in very central parts of human history. Conspiracies sometimes aim to alter bedrock institutions, meaning to flip the foundations of human societies. Conspiracy theories promise 3 social psychological motives. The first being epistemic, that meaning the desire for understanding, accuracy, and subjective certainty. Existential, that meaning the desire for control and security. And social, referring to the desire to maintain a positive image of the self or the group. Let's first turn to the epistemic function of conspiracy theories. Conspiracies proliferate when one is uncertain, when there are certain conditions that dizzy or disorient the person, leading them to a sense of not really understanding what's going on around them, whether in terms of an interpersonal situation or larger, more macro situations. When information overwhelms and confuses the individual, they reach for easily understandable explanations, simple stories that could thus replace the complexity of the modern world. And these types of stories that they reach for are very simple in their structure. There's always, I shouldn't say always, but often a sort of good versus evil dynamic that you find in many stories. And they try to create and assign this story to their everyday lives, political lives, the scientific side of life, social life, etc., to be able to walk in a world that they now understand, as opposed to the more complex modernized world that confounds and disorients them. Individuals, it's worth mentioning, who overestimate their ability to understand complex subjects tend to adopt conspiracy theories. If you recall, I had us watch part of the movie The Trial, directed by Orson Welles and based off of Franz Kafka's novel The Trial, where the individual is being arrested but does not know what he or she is arrested for. Some have said this story is symbolic of how the modern individual does not really understand the society that they are walking through, that society is so modernized and so complicated and so interconnected that all of these bureaucratic structures that are in place are meant to make our lives more simple, but in another way they make us feel trapped, they make us feel confused. And it is this sort of state of confusion or this sort of disoriented worldview where you can't really see anything and that you're sort of just a cog in the machine, so to speak. This produces a desire for clarity, a desire for certainty over the world in which you live in, and rather than try to understand the complexity of the world, parts of which are incomprehensible even to the brightest of minds, you develop stories instead, and you say that the world is constituted by these stories that you have created, or if you have not created, adopted through interaction. And these stories, of course, are conspiracy theories. There's more to be said about the epistemic function. We often see conspiracy theories in the form of anti-science attitudes, anti-science conspiracy theories, where we claim that the scientist is not really a scientist, not really an expert, but instead a villain of sorts. We create all types of stories about who these, villainous scientists are really working for, etc. We have a quest to have a unique view of the world, meaning that conspiracy theories allow us to feel as if we have access to rare knowledge that the vast majority of the population doesn't. And we see things for how they really are, and whereas everybody else is sort of duped and doesn't understand things. Conspiracy theories can, make you feel special in that way. If you develop a sort of let's say, obscure understanding of how the world operates and have convinced yourself that you are one of few people who understand this obscure reality. As for the existential motive associated with conspiracy theories, conspiracies are often associated with feelings of powerlessness, feelings of anxiety, and having a lack of control in one's personal life and in the socio-political domain. Thus, conspiracy theories allow us to feel as if we are fighting against the forces that make us feel powerless, fighting against the political systems that maybe we don't fully understand, trying to get a sense of existential well-being and security by assigning clarity as to how these political structures are composed and the ways in which that we can maybe enter combat with them. Conspiracy theories offer something like that as well, and I've here attached a couple of videos if you would like to watch. As for social motives, the authors show us that high levels of boredom are actually associated with conspiracy theories. There's maybe a discontent with one's everyday life, a sort of boredom with one's everyday life, and the story of reality might not be all that exciting to one. So they engage in story creation to try to transcend their everyday life, to try to enter into a new reality, something that might be a little bit less boring. Conspiracies are also associated with narcissism, as well as a need for external validation. As I said, this unique view of the world that conspiracy theories allow one to feel, makes them feel special by comparison to others who don't adopt the conspiracy theories, and it boosts their self-esteem. There's also a matter of not just an individual narcissism, but a collective narcissism that is important for conspiracy theories. Collective narcissism involves the belief that one's in-group, a member of your group is special and not being valued by society in the way that they deserve. As I said, I included some, there's a silly picture in the example before of a Bigfoot researcher. But as I said at the beginning of this lecture, conspiracy theories take on a very dark character that have entered into key moments in historical developments, such as anti-Semitic conspiracy theories of, a group of Jewish people who want to dominate society. Of course, Nazis propagated these conspiracy theories in their propaganda. This type of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories are still present today. There's still, in some corners, talk of how Jewish people are seeking wealth and seeking to have media control and control over the banks. Really, disgusting rhetoric that again aligns with this sort of good versus evil story structure that we talked about. Again, it's a very simple story, a very simple explanation to try to explain complicated social phenomena. And it's also a type of story that allows one to feel as if their own social group is better than other social groups. So there's the social psychological motive that falls under the social function. Conspiracy theories are not just stories that we dream up. They have functions. They serve existential, social, and epistemic functions. Some other factors that are associated with conspiracy theories that Douglas et al. Bring up are that the fact that conspiracies are associated with low levels of education and low levels of income. There's also some debate about how politics enter the conspiratorial association. So some researchers say that conspiracies are more likely to be endorsed among conservatives than among liberals. However, there's a couple of caveats to these findings. It's true that that research has been produced. On the other hand, this could be the result of the fact of we need to consider the researcher themselves. The researchers and social scientists in particular tend to be left-wing. They tend to be liberal more often than they are conservative. Of course, not all, but some, I would say for the most part. And since they are themselves liberal, when they study conspiracy theories, they might be more likely to have biases that lead them to the finding that conservatives are more likely to endorse conspiracy theories than liberals are. It's also worth noting that we really don't know a whole lot about this topic in terms of politics because, furthermore, researchers have complicated the matter even more so by showing that it isn't so much a left versus right divide, not so much a liberal versus conservative, Republican versus Democrat divide, but rather a moderate versus extreme divide. Some researchers show that moderates are not very likely to endorse the conspiracy theories, whether they be left-wing moderates or right-wing moderates, whereas extremists on both the left and the right are much more likely to endorse conspiracy theories. Extremists, it should be noted, are also much less likely to have political knowledge. Moderates tend to be much more knowledgeable about politics and are less likely to engage in conspiracy theories. Extremists tend to be ignorant about politics and tend to endorse conspiracy theories. There's also an interesting discussion in the reading about conspiracies and power. They ask us, are conspiracies for losers? And they don't mean that in a mean way. They talk about how conspiracies, when a Republican is president, when Republicans are in power, then conspiracy theories tend to be against Republicans in power. Conspiracies tend to be endorsed by Democrats. And then when a Democrat is in power and Democrat is president, then conspiracies tend to be among Republicans against the Democrats. So when one's party is in a loser position, when they are not in power, then they start turning toward conspiracy theories. As we said before, there's feelings of powerlessness are associated with conspiracy theories, and that could be an individual matter, but it could also, powerlessness could attach to a larger socio-political domain that is closely linked to conspiratorial ideation. So some examples could be after the 2016 election, when Donald Trump defeated Hillary Clinton, many Democrats started engaging in voter fraud conspiracy theories about how that election took place. And then in 2020, the same thing happened, but just in reverse. When Joe Biden defeated Donald Trump, many Republicans started endorsing voter fraud conspiracies as well. So there is something about being in the losing position and having a lack of power that is associated with conspiratorial ideation. Turning to the next article, this is a purely theoretical piece and a very good one too. If you didn't have the time to read it yet, I definitely recommend reading Trust No One, Modernization, Paranoia, and Conspiracy Culture by Stef Oppers. He's a Dutch sociologist. It's a very interesting read. So in the abstract here, we have some writing from Oppers talking about how conspiracy theories might have a sort of quasi-religious function to them. They offer a story for us in a disenchanted and secularized world. That is a good way to preface this. I will then next dive into the introduction, where Oppers describes how scholars focus on conspiracy theories, though traditionally, and I would say with contemporary scholarship on the topic as well, they have not done so in a value-neutral way. When we discussed in the semester about Luther Bernard, we discussed value-free as opposed to activist sociology, whereas the value-free sociologist is concerned that the activist sociologist is not observing with a dispassionate eye that looks for objective truth. Oppers seems to be expressing a similar apprehension here, saying that conspiracy theories are often condemned by the researcher on moral and intellectual grounds rather than studied in a dispassionate manner. So this type of posture, that meaning a value imposing posture, a moral posture, interferes with our understanding of the dynamics of conspiracy theories. Oppers goes on to talk about how conspiracy theories are traditionally were thought to be directed toward an exotic other, so meaning out groups such as members of different racial groups, members of different religious groups, immigrants, etc. But in the modern world, the conspiracies have now taken on a new character of being opposed to one's own modern society, the enemy from within version of conspiracy theories. There's implications of power as well as disempowerment. Anti-science conspiracies, for example, have proliferated most in the most scientifically advanced societies. On page 28, there's something about living in the modernized world where that is again disorienting and dizzying to people. They don't like the fact that they don't have much understanding over the world that they live within, and they therefore try to reach for sources of understandability. This might be why the fact that in the most scientifically advanced societies we are more likely to engage in anti-science conspiracy theories, because those of us who aren't scientists, i.e. 99% of the population, don't really understand the way the drivers of modern society. We feel kind of powerless and subjected to them, and therefore reach for conspiracy theories as a sense of empowerment. On page 28, he quotes Karl Mannheim, a German social theorist from the mid-20th century, who writes, "Just as nature was unintelligible to primitive man, and his deepest feelings of anxiety arose from the incalculability of the forces of nature, so for modern industrialized man, the incalculability of the forces at work in the social system under which he lives has become a source of equally pervading fears." Oppers goes on to write that conspiracy theories function as cultural resources. They, similar, connected to the previous reading, they are cultural responses to feelings of anxiety, feelings of uncertainty, feelings of powerlessness. There's also a sort of ironic aspect I wanted to touch upon on page 29, where conspiracy theories are often associated with paranoia and fear, and some of these conspiracies take the form of believing that a big bad government or a big bad organization of some kind is trying to develop mind control over citizens, and there's even talk about implanting digital chips for this control, etc., etc. A very smart irony pointed out by Oppers is that some of this type of writing some of these patterns can be found in critical theorists, such as Adorno. He used the example of Horkheimer and Adorno, and we discussed Adorno a little bit earlier in the semester. Particularly in the writings about culture, we talked more about Adorno's views on politics, not so much on culture. But this idea that the cultural sphere is pacifying the masses. They don't use the word mind control, but sort of developing turning the masses into dupes who will do what they're told, and develop a sort of lethargic attitude toward the status quo, and not be particularly intellectually sound. I'm going to read this smart irony pointed out by Oppers on page 29, right at the top there. "The culture industry," Horkheimer and Adorno argued over half a century ago, "can do as it chooses with the needs of consumers, producing, controlling, disciplining them." I'm going to read that part again. Producing, controlling, disciplining them. Ironically, then, such radical claims about social control developed in the social sciences are nowadays popularized by conspiracy theorists. Conspiracies are often trying to figure out what is quote-unquote really going on. There's intense doubt, intense skepticism about everyday life and the larger story of the socio-political domain, and conspiracy theories want to find out what's happening in the system behind the system, or behind the scenes, etc. That there is some sort of nefarious small group of people who are seeking the detriment of the masses. This lack of understanding of, let's say, complex political systems of the modern social world overwhelms individuals, and it produces great paranoia, great fear, and that leads to conspiracy theories reaching for sources of understandability, typically in the simple forms of good versus evil. I'm going to read on page 29, Craig Calhoun, a sociologist, writes, "The omnipresence of system felt in our lives shapes a paranoid worldview in which understandability is won only by belief in omnipresent conspiracy." There's also the matter of disenchantment I would want to bring up, turning to page 30, where conspiracy theories in a disenchanted world offer some of the things that religion used to. Of course, religion still exists in society today, though proponents of disenchantment would say less so and less forcefully. If we recall with Weber, when we were discussing the five tensions, those five spheres, the intellectual sphere had a sort of a competition for explanation of the world. And this comes into play here, the tension between the intellectual sphere and religion as society rationalizes with their competition to understand the world, where religion tries to understand the meaning of the world, science and the intellectual rationalized sphere tries to seek laws that better our understanding of how the world, the processes that guide universal laws. Reading from page 30 here, Max Weber famously wrote about a disenchantment of the world, a long-standing process in the West that eroded mysterious accounts of nature, magic, and ultimately the belief in every metaphysical Hinterwelt that once provided the Western world with solid meaning. This is the tragic dimension of modernity. Science describes the world as it is, but can by its very nature say nothing about what the world's processes really mean, and what the meaning of life actually is. The intellectual imperative to pursue the truth contributes to a world devoid of existential meaning, a world in which processes simply are and happen, but no longer signify anything. Later down the page, he goes on to write, "Conspiracy theorists relocate such mysterious forces from nature to modern society. Invisible yet immensely powerful forces are operative behind the cultural scenes, underneath and beyond the empirical surface of modern life. Such a worldview generates meaning. It reverses the Weberian disenchantment of the world, since the cultural world is not as it is. Processes do not simply happen, but do signify something. The conspiracy theorist suspects there is intention where others find coincidence and contingency. They detect structure where others see chaos. They find meaning where others do not. Conspiracy theories require a form of quasi-religious conviction, a sense that the conspiracy in question is an entity with almost supernatural powers."